You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast hosted by two women who never met in real life, which honestly might be the secret to our success.
I was just talking to a friend of mine who listens, and she was telling me how much she actually hopes we don't meet because she feels like it's become such a thing now that it would almost be a shame if we were to ever meet, but
right.
I mean, so before we start today, we would like to give a huge shout out to our newest Patreon members, and they are Rhonda, Frost, Merrill, thank you very much, and Joel, thank you so much. Thank you for supporting what we do. And to all of our amazing patrons, you are the reason we're able to keep the lights on in this very spooky little corner of the internet. I also want to mention that I am finally using my good microphone. I'm finally using the expensive, nice microphone that I saved for and bought with the Patreon money. So I hope it sounds okay and I don't. It's a new mic, everyone. That's all.
We're going to figure it out.
Yeah, it's fine. We missed our anniversary again, I think.
Every year.
Every year. We're the worst couple.
No, we're so stable that we don't even need anniversaries.
We don't. That's right. Every year we miss it, but I think was it our sixth? We just missed our 6th anniversary.
We also want to thank everyone who's recommended the show to a friend, shared an episode, or, just told someone, hey, I heard the weirdest story today. Because that helps us a lot and it also means the world to us. And if you'd like to support Fresh Hell and get access to Cinema Macabre and live streams and early access and stickers or the occasional cursed object. No, we're kidding, mostly. You can join us over on Patreon and we'll let you know some other ways to help us out at the end of the episode.
Yes, because now it is time to dive into today's episode. Johanna has a really eerie, spooky case from Germany for us.
Yeah, it's a missing persons case, and I mean persons as in plural, because today's episode involves the disappearance of children. And while there is no graphic violence, the subject matter is still, obviously, deeply upsetting, and so I'd like just to tell you, listen with care. And as we always do over here, and for you to understand the case we're talking about today, I'd like to take a moment to paint a picture for you, because Pirmasens is not the kind of place you'd expect something like this to happen. It's located in the state of Rheinland-Pfalz, and it's not a place you've likely heard of unless you're from Germany, or more specifically, the southwest of Germany. It's nestled in the low mountains of the Palatinate forest, not far from the French border. And even today, it feels rather quiet. It's tucked away. But for most of its history, it's been anything but insignificant. The town traces its roots back over 1,000 years. Its name comes from Saint Pirmasens, who was a missionary monk who founded the nearby Hornbach Abbey in the 8th century. And for centuries, Pirmasens was a small, sleepy settlement under the protection of various noble houses, first the Count of Saarbrücken, later the Landgraf of Hesse-Darmstadt. But in the mid-1700s, everything changed, because that's when Landgraf Ludwig IX of Hesse-Darmstadt chose Pirmasens to be a garrison town and made it his personal residence. He granted the town full municipal rights in 1763, and it quickly grew from a remote village into a kind of town. Yes, it became a town. There were barracks and parade grounds, and a grand Protestant church sprang up. Some of these buildings still stand today, and you can still see the symmetrical layout of those drill grounds, the Exerzierplatz, in the town's central square. We're going to talk about that in a second. Pirmasens grew fast, and then it grew rich. In the 19th century, the town shifted from military muscles to manufacturing. And one thing, above all, defined its economy, and that was shoes. By the early 20th century, Pirmasens was Germany's undisputed shoe capital. So if you were born there, odds were rather good that you'd end up working in the industry. Fathers worked in the factories, mothers stitched and glued uppers at home, and children learned the trade before they were even teenagers. Entire families lived and breathed shoe production. It gave the town a sense of rhythm, of predictability, a pride in craftsmanship. Pirmasens even became known internationally for its high-quality leather footwear. I think they also dabbled in kind of bag making and saddle making, but the main focus was on shoes. Of course, like most of Europe, Pirmasens suffered deeply during the Second World War. The town was heavily bombed and large parts of it were destroyed. But in the years that followed, people rebuilt, factories reopened, families returned, and life resumed. And in many ways it became what it had always been, an industrious, middle-class town where nothing particularly strange ever happened. By the early 1960s, Pirmasens had a population of around 55,000 people, so it wasn't a village anymore, as I said. But still, it had the feeling of a village. A town where most people had grown up together, gone to school together, and stayed. Generations worked in the same factories. Families lived in the same apartments for decades. And even though the war had left deep scars, this was a community that knew how to rebuild. By the mid-60s, the economy was recovering, the shoe factories were humming again, and people had started to believe in stability. Pirmasens had settled into a post-war routine, and it was a place where people still left their doors unlocked, where kids played freely in the streets and walked themselves to school, where nothing truly terrible was ever supposed to happen.
It's always like that, isn't it? There's a kind of invisible line a community doesn't even know it's standing on, right? Until something terrible happens and pushes it over that line. Just one awful event, and the way the people see the world shifts. What felt safe before suddenly doesn't anymore. And the old sense of normal, it doesn't really come back, not really.
And how many times did we say in cases like this was a place where doors were unlocked, where neighbors knew each other, where kids could just play outside in the streets, in the nature, blah, blah, blah. We hear this so many times.
All the time.
And then, as you said, something changes. And yeah, as you said, Pirmasens would cross that invisible line. 3 children would vanish from the same small city, each one on a Friday, each from roughly the same area, and no bodies were ever found, and no one was ever charged. And to this day, no one knows what happened to them.
Oh, wow. I think when you told me that you had a story about missing children, I was imagining something like the Beaumont children. I didn't realize that this was about 3 separate abductions.
Right?
Wow. Yeah, that's disturbing.
I mean, it's scary to think of like the Beaumont children were 3 children all at once disappear, but also having several children disappear over a certain amount of time is, I don't know, what's more scary.
I think the problem with, so I think in a situation like the Beaumont children, where a bunch of children go missing altogether all at once, is terrifying and awful and all of those things. But it can be, I don't want to say explained away, but it can be rationalized as a 1 in a million chance encounter with a bad person, right? But this, where you have 3 kids who go missing over a period of time, that is more disturbing to me because that feels like somebody in the area is hunting children.
You're right, yeah. So, the first child to disappear was Walter Broschat. It was Friday, 25th of November 1960, was the start of a chilly weekend in the industrial town. And Walter, who was 9 years old at the time, left his family home that day at some point. And at some point he passed through the Messeplatz area, which is a large open square. Even in the colder month, it was kind of a place where there was a lot of activity, a lot of people were around.
Okay, what's in that area? Is it?
So the Messeplatz in Pirmasens was and still is a large open square near the center of town. In German, Messe means fair or exposition, and Platz means square. So this was quite literally the town's fairground. In the 1960s, and I think even to this day, it hosted weekly markets, seasonal fairs, wandering amusement rides. If Barnum would have come to town, I think that's most likely where he would have set up tents. It definitely was the kind of place where children met up, to play, to swap marbles or watch the carnival being set up, and where parents shopped for fresh produce and neighbors stopped to catch up on gossip. It was busy, it was open, and it was in public. And it's exactly the kind of place where nothing terrible could happen to a child. I have to add one thing though. Some reports call it the Messeplatz, others say the Exerzierplatz. And that difference matters because these aren't just two names for the same square. I mean, they are, but also there are two different places in different parts of town. And the Exerzierplatz, I think, is what's meant here. The Exerzierplatz, that translates to drill ground. And it's one of the oldest and most historically significant squares in Pirmasens. It was originally laid out in the 18th century during the time of Landgraf Ludwig IX, who I mentioned before. As I said, when Pirmasens was a military garrison, and back then the Exerzierplatz was, I think, 3 times larger than it is today. And the soldiers, the grenadier, they would march and train there daily. It's a beautiful, I will post a photo, it's a beautiful square, honestly.
A nice big open space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it.
By the 20th century, it had become like a central feature of the town. People strolled beneath the chestnut trees on Sundays, and children played there. After the war, it became a market square during weekends. So I think, as I said, the Exerzierplatz is what's meant here when they say Messeplatz or Exerzierplatz. If we have a listener from the area, I'm sure you can clear this up for me. The Exerzierplatz is closer to the Pirmasens city center, and the Neues Rathaus, the new city hall, is also not far from there, and the residential neighborhoods are close by, and the Rheinberger shoe factory is close by. So, yeah. Fact remains, the children disappeared in broad daylight in a public place without anyone noticing. So that's where Walter was seen that day, and then nothing. Walter Broschat vanished without a trace. And his disappearance sparked immediate concern. This wasn't a case where a child wandered off and was expected to return after a few hours. By nightfall, it was very clear to his family and to the local police that something was very wrong. And searches began quickly. The police officers and volunteers combed through the area, the fairground, the nearby woods, canals, cellars, every place a small boy might have gotten lost or been hiding or been hidden maybe. But there was nothing, no clothing, no school bag, no witnesses. Walter was simply gone. And we should remember that in 1960 the tools available to law enforcement were very limited. There were no surveillance cameras, no emergency alerts on television, no digital footprints to trace his kind of movements. It was a matter of walking the streets and knocking on doors and hoping that someone had seen something. But no one had. And I also want to add that to this day there's very little publicly available information about Walter Broschat. I searched through all the newspaper archives available to us and nothing really came up. So we don't know much about his family, his school life, or even what he was wearing that day. And I think the reason for that, and I mentioned it so many times before, is that in Germany and also Austria and other European countries, there are very strict privacy laws that protect not only the living, but also the deceased and the missing persons. And especially when the victims are children. Also add to the fact that this case is over 60 years old and there's just a lot of question marks left.
Yeah, this is often the case in the old-timey cases from Austria and Germany from, 200, 250 years ago. They had way more information available than cases taking place after World War II.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
We do know, however, that Walter's disappearance sent a wave of fear through the town. Pirmasens in 1960s, as I said, was not a place where you think children just could go missing. And now parents began keeping their children closer. People who were once friendly and waved to each other on the street now kind of looked twice and everybody was suspicious all of a sudden. But at the time, there was no pattern yet. There was no reason to. It was just one isolated tragedy, terrible, but just one. Except it wasn't. It wouldn't stay that way. Because Walter Broschat wasn't the only child who would disappear from Pirmasens. The second child to vanish was Klaus-Dieter Stark. And it was Friday, 17th of January, 1964. Klaus-Dieter, again, was a 9-year-old boy, just like Walter Broschat had been. And he lived in Pirmasens with his parents, attended the local elementary school, and like most kids in town, was used to walking places on his own. The Messeplatz, once again, was part of his day. And around 2:15 p.m., Klaus-Dieter left his home. And I have a little bit more information about his disappearance because I found an old newsreel from the time. A video, I'm going to provide a link in the sources. I think he probably wanted to meet up with some friends or was hoping to run into some of his friends or schoolmates to play.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we rolled back before cell phones and the internet. You just went out to find your friends.
Yeah, exactly. So he set off towards the fairgrounds. And he was also seen entering a grocery store on the way to buy a little snack or treat. And then he continued his way towards the square. His parents returned home from work roughly 3 hours later, and they started to worry about the whereabouts of their son. And remember, it was mid-January, and it's already starting to get dark out around that time of day. Soon the police were called, and within hours a full search was underway. And what happened next was almost identical to the search for Walter Broschat. Officers and local volunteers combed the area, flyers were posted, people were interviewed, the borders, the cars crossing over to France were inspected even more closely, even more thoroughly. They searched everything in the area, the cemetery, the local clay pit, the trash dump, the air raid shelters in the neighborhood. Like, this was still very much a thing, not only in the 60s, but I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, there were still the local air raid shelters from World War II. And this was obviously a place or places where children would be interested in, right? It's kind of dangerous and mysterious and you really don't know what it is all about. But we were strictly forbidden to ever get into the air raid shelters because at the time the structures were already kind of falling apart. So it was rather dangerous. So they searched all these places. And now and then they would find a piece of clothing like a boy's hat or a sweater, these kind of things. And all of these items they found, they would be shown to Klaus-Dieter's parents, but none of the items belonged to their boy. But on 12th of March, they find a glove near a local pond. And Klaus-Dieter's parents say that this looks exactly like the one that belonged to their boy. So now they drain the pond to be able to search everything because they now fear that the child has drowned, but they find nothing. So once again, no real trace of the missing child.
This is so sad and so scary because, I mean, people must have made the connection.
Definitely. People in Pirmasens, they began to understand that Walter's disappearance might be kind of connected to Klaus-Dieter's disappearance. It's 2 boys, both 9 years old, both gone without a trail, without a trace, both last seen in approximately the same area, both on a Friday. So I think there was just no way to ignore similarities in these cases.
Yeah.
Of course, they also questioned everyone in the area that could be a potential suspect, like people who were convicted pedophiles, who had been convicted for assaulting or molesting someone, but nothing really came of that either. There was one suspicious person who lived in Pirmasens. Well, he didn't actually live in town, but in a ramshackle hut in the woods, and he was known as the Waldmensch, the forest man. Now, I want to make one thing very clear. In most written sources I read, especially those that emerged in the 1970s, and beyond that point, the man is described as having only come under suspicion after the 3rd child disappeared in 1967, because that's when the cases were re-examined more seriously and offender profiling began to play a role. And in that version of events, the police looked back at all 3 disappearances and only then did the Waldmensch become a suspect. But I told you before I found a newsreel about the disappearance of Klaus-Dieter, and this reel is from 1964. And in it, the Waldmensch is already mentioned. And I don't know if it could be like a paid extra or an actor standing in as the Waldmensch, but I think it's actually him, and we can see him for a few seconds in that video.
Okay.
And in the video, He's specifically named as a person who had attracted the attention of the public during the investigation. And more than that, the police in the video go out of their way to state that he had been questioned and that they were convinced he had nothing to do with it. So while later sources place him in the story as a suspect who emerged years later, the reality is kind of more complicated. So he was already known to the community, he was already considered suspicious by some, and he was already on the police's radar during the investigation into Klaus-Dieter's disappearance. But, and this is important, as I said, the authorities publicly cleared him at the time. At least that's what they said. But we will get back to him in a few moments, because first we need to talk about the third disappearance. And the third child to disappear was Eveline Lübbert. She was 10 years old, and she disappeared on a Friday on 8th of September 1967. So more than 3 years after Klaus-Dieter Stark had gone missing. And by this point, Pirmasens had already lived through the 2 unexplained disappearances, and parents had been more cautious than ever. And the memory of what happened to Walter and Klaus-Dieter hadn't faded. And yet, it happened again. That afternoon, Eveline had been out doing what many 10-year-olds love to do to this day, window shopping. She was last seen looking at this place in the Kaufhalle. It's kind of a mall, a department store area near the city's Exerzierplatz. I think this is just an ordinary after-school activity, especially on a Friday. Also, as I said, familiar area, not far from home, middle of day, many people around. And then she was just gone. Eveline was apparently last seen by a classmate. Eveline told her that she wanted to go and buy some candy. And then later the classmate noticed that Eveline didn't get on the bus. But at the time, she didn't think much of it. She just thought, well, Eveline is still out shopping or strolling around. But we know now that Eveline had vanished without a trace on a Friday in the middle of this public space. And for the townspeople, it was impossible to believe that this was a coincidence. 3 children disappearing, no evidence, no arrest, nothing.
Yeah, and about the same age and around the same time between disappearances, like a little over 3 years between.
Weird, right?
Yeah.
Like eerie.
Yeah, it's strange that the third child was a girl, but maybe the age is more important than the gender. I don't know.
So by the time Eveline Lübbert disappeared, the people of Pirmasens had seen the police respond to 2 similar cases with absolute urgency, and they saw it again now. Search teams were organized immediately. The fire brigade was called in, police dogs, divers, military personnel joined. Forests, ponds, abandoned buildings, clay pits were searched, flyers were distributed throughout the region. Every report, every sighting, every possible lead was followed up. And for the small working-class town, that mattered because people saw that the authorities were not ignoring what had happened. They understood that the police were doing everything they could, but it still wasn't enough. There were no answers. And when a community is left without answers, most of the time what happens is rumors begin to spread. And the same happened in Pirmasens. Because some people believed that the children hadn't been murdered at all, but taken, kidnapped, and sold, they said, to wealthy families, possibly abroad. There were those who believed those weren't random disappearances, but part of a hidden network. Children from poorer families, they said, working-class kids, who wouldn't make the front page of a national paper, who could simply vanish and be forgotten by the world.
The thing about rumors like this is they don't need to be true to stick. They just need more sense than silence. Or nothing, they just latch on to anything. And when you have 3 missing kids and no answers, even the wildest theories start to feel like maybe they do explain something, anything.
Absolutely, that's true. Of course, there was no evidence for any of this, but there was this kind of huge vacuum. And I think it's just natural that theories and rumors fill this kind of void because there were no facts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think for families who had lost a child, even these wild, speculative stories, especially the ones that end with, well, they were adopted by a wealthy family, right? That at least gives you a hope that your child is out there somewhere, safe, because the alternative, the idea that something had happened right here in their hometown where they should have been safe, and that somebody out there was getting away with maybe murder over and over again, that would be a lot to take on. And I think it's part of that self-preservation, right? To think that your child now lives a happy life with some rich people and it's all ponies and milkshakes.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, as you said, I think it's really self-preservation. So as the years passed, the names of Walter Broschat, Klaus-Dieter Stark and Eveline Lübbert, they stayed with the good people of Pirmasens, and I think they still do to this day, because even though it's been more than 60 years since the 3 children disappeared, the people who lived through that time obviously haven't forgotten. And of course, especially the families. They've spent decades carrying the weight of not knowing. And one of them is doing something about it, because I found this very interesting article on swr.de about a man who is apparently making a documentary about the missing children of Pirmasens. It's possible it's already released by now. So anyway, the filmmaker's name is Hauck, and he's from Klausen, which is just outside of Pirmasens. But more importantly, he's actually Eveline Lübbert's cousin. He was 16 years old when Eveline disappeared, and he remembers her very clearly. She was 10 years old, she was shy but determined, she came from a working-class family, but she had ambitions. Eveline wanted to go to gymnasium, which is our equivalent of high school. She wanted to kind of set her way on the academic track. She wanted to make something of herself, and Henry says that obviously that future was just taken from her. In the interview, he also tells that his aunt, so Eveline's mother, somehow managed to hold things together, but Eveline's father didn't. He just fell apart.
Yeah, it's hard. That's a heavy one. Yeah. We talked about this a little bit in that Lizzie Halliday epic about, how easy it is to forget that crimes have a lot of different victims involved, the families of the people involved. The damage keeps spreading. It just pulls entire families under with it, doesn't it?
It's also a lot of generational trauma, because you give it on even to people who were not born at the time.
That's right. Yep. And does Henry remember anything? I mean, if he was 16 at the time, he must have some memories, right?
Well, he says he remembers being questioned by the police. At the time, he was apparently away at boarding school in Speyer. The investigators came to the school and interrogated him, and he had an alibi. The staff could confirm he was there. And he says that it didn't bother him that he was a suspect, but he was shaken by the fact that his cousin was just gone, just disappeared like that. And for decades, he said he couldn't bring himself to even talk about it, let alone turn it into a film. But eventually, his silence and the not talking turned into anger. And this anger pushed him forward and kind of made him want to make this documentary. It's called Spurlos, warum die Zeit keine Wunden heilt, without a trace, why time doesn't heal wounds. And he talked to friends, siblings, archivists. He went through all the case files in the city archive, and he also tried reaching out to the families of Walter and Klaus-Dieter, but apparently they weren't ready to speak. The pain is just still too much for them to get interviewed.
Yeah, so that surprises me. I would have thought that I'm not judging anybody, but I would have imagined that because their children might still be out there somewhere, that you'd be very vocal about sharing information and images and asking for info and all that kind of thing. Like, are they all on Ancestry DNA? Like, after 50 years? That's hard. Yeah. It's a lot.
It's 60 years even, and I guess they were vocal in the beginning.
Yeah.
Henry also says that one of the most frustrating parts for him was the response from authorities. Like, he was stonewalled repeatedly by police and by the prosecutor's office, which he doesn't understand. Quote, I kept getting brushed off. Nothing but excuses. It was strange, really strange, end quote.
Does he have a theory about what might have happened to his cousin?
Well, he doesn't believe Eveline is still alive, apparently. And yes, he has his own theories. One of them is the same theory that many people in town had, that the children were trafficked abroad, possibly by someone who targeted children for wealthy families. But he also says, it's just speculation. He doesn't have any proof for that.
Yeah, the problem, I think, with that theory, for me anyway, and I sincerely hope I would be wrong about this, but I would just think that at some point their age would come into play. And I am saying this with zero facts about child trafficking in front of me, but I just feel like logically you would be after a younger child. You know, I think part of the reason people thought this might have happened with, say, like Madeleine McCann, right? She was 3 when she went missing. And yeah, you can carry a 3-year-old. And if you, this is a really terrible unkind way to put things, but if you kidnap a 3-year-old and then give her to a wealthy family to raise as their own, you're probably young enough to maybe pull that off. Like, you might get to our age and not ever realize that had happened to you. Do you know what I mean? You can create a new reality for them. But a 9 or a 10-year-old, I'm sorry, but I just feel like they are going to fight back and they're going to remember too much. It's really hard for me to imagine like a 9. And plus, how do you explain a 9 or 10-year-old?
Absolutely. I agree with you on the part that they are, they already have kind of developed the character. They, as you said, they remember. It's not that easy. But I think I disagree with you on the part where you say they would be fighting back, because you shouldn't forget that the 60s, especially over here, and I'm sure that it was the same in the US, grown-ups were authority figures. Like, you didn't question them. And the awareness wasn't there that you would teach your children not to get into cars or not talk to strangers, or you were pretty much raised to obey what adults told you.
Yeah, no, maybe not. I just think after a certain period of time, like, they wouldn't just take it. They'd be trying to find some more information out.
Possible.
It's all really awful to
horrible.
Speculate about.
One last thing about Henry Hauck, he believes that the investigation narrowed down too quickly, that they focused too much on one theory and just one suspect. And this suspect was the aforementioned Waldmensch. And I think now it's time to talk about the investigations and the Waldmensch, the forest man.
Yeah, that name is creepy.
It is creepy, and it also kind of has this undertone of othering him in a way. But
very much so.
I'm still so torn on this person, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts by the end after I tell you everything I read and learned about him. So, by the time the investigation into the missing children was reopened in the 1970s, one name kept resurfacing. A man the people of Pirmasens had known for years, not very well known, but they remembered him. And he was kind of a local figure. You know, this kind of person everyone kind of knows in a town because he's the weird one or the odd one.
I sure do. Yep, definitely.
In the case files, he is referred to as Günther J. So Günther J. Again, I read his last name, but in most articles and case files, it's just shortened to the first letter of his last name, so I'm just going to refer to him by that name. He was born in Pirmasens. He was the second of 3 sons of a local jeweler, and his early childhood was described as stable and unremarkable. In school, he stood out for being exceptionally quick and sharp. His teachers noted his remarkable comprehension and skills of learning. After finishing school, he moved to Freiburg, where he attended lectures in psychology and philosophy, but he didn't complete a degree. Then, in 1954, something changed. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the doctors described a noticeable change in his personality, including what they would call a religious delusion. He was treated at several psychiatric hospitals, including clinics in Heidelberg, Landeck, and Oberursel, before returning to live with his parents. But he had completely changed. Around town, people began to refer to him as quote-unquote harmless madman. So he would be seen standing alone for hours, leaning against the wall, staring into the distance, not saying anything. He was always quiet, apparently always very polite, and the state prosecutor would later describe him as a peacefully smiling man. And he was anxious around people and avoided attention. He was never aggressive. He was never threatening. He couldn't hold down a regular job due to his mental health issues. He worked sporadically, 2 weeks here, a month there. He worked as a roofer. He worked as a farmhand, supermarket stocker, a helper in a shoe factory, but nothing long time, nothing stuck. He began to distance himself from his parents. He told investigators that he refused to be treated like a child or like someone who was ill. He wanted to live independently. But this independence came with a cost because he cut off contact completely and the family stopped talking altogether. Like they went no contact or he went no contact. In 1963, he left the city behind entirely and he moved into the nearby forest.
Yeah. That is such a sad and also all too common way, I think, that someone with a loving family who cares about them becomes somebody who is unhoused.
It's so hard because what you're going to do, these are grown
It's so hard.
people, these are adults. And even if
That's
you try
right.
the best,
Unmedicated, mentally ill. Yep.
It's so hard.
You can't force them.
Sometimes these families just have to stand by and watch.
Right. Especially when they go no contact with you because there's just nothing.
Yeah.
It's awful.
And there he lived in the forest in kind of, it was a ramshackle hut, as I called it before. It was near the pond. Yeah, that was his home for a while. He lost a lot of weight. He grew his hair long. He wore a dark, dirty coat. And that's how most people in Pirmasens came to know him, a thin, silent figure in the woods alone. And I understand why people, especially back then where mental health wasn't discussed as much, would find that creepy and odd and kind of scary.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
What's also worth noticing is that the 42-year-old apparently knew both of the missing boys. He was known to seek out the company of children. He was reportedly seen in the areas where they disappeared, and he led a life that police described as unstable. Then in the 1970s, when the police reopened the investigation into the disappearances of the 3 children, Günther J. became a serious suspect.
Yeah, it seems like one of those cases where the person in question checks all the boxes that they're looking to tick, except the one that matters most, because there's no proof, right? There's just a man who doesn't really fit in and a town who doesn't really know quite what to make of him. And that might be the hardest part when someone feels like an answer, but maybe isn't. An easy scapegoat.
Yeah, I agree. An easy scapegoat, maybe, but maybe also. I'm so confused by this case, really.
I know.
Okay, so.
Tell me
1973.
More.
A new lead investigator stepped in, Kriminalrat Ernst Fischer. He had this new perspective, which is a good thing, right? And also a very interesting new tool that hadn't been used in the original investigation, and it was called a Rasterfahndung. And the word literally means grid search or dragnet profiling. And what I didn't know, that this was developed in West Germany as a way to systemically sift through large populations to find suspects based on very specific traits or behaviors. Like the manual version of what we now call data profiling, right? So in practice, it meant defining a set of criteria based on known patterns, for example, age, gender, living situation, criminal history, psychological evaluation, proximity to crime scenes, the such. So that was also really early profiling already going on. Then you would check everyone in the area against the list, manually, which was labor intensive. There was no digital data they could use. But at the time, it was seen as one of the most advanced investigative tools, absolutely cutting edge.
That's interesting, isn't it? And so labor intensive. It's amazing how much technology has, just in the last, in our lifetime even.
Archives, cards with names and addresses and notes, and then there's a lot of walking and interviewing and questioning. So much work.
So much.
Like in this case, investigators screened around 7,000 men. There were American and French soldiers who were still stationed nearby. There were local workers, factory staff, residents of the surrounding areas. So anyone who might have been in the right place at the wrong time or the right time however you want to see it. And of those 7,000, one person seemed to fit the profile, Günther J., the Waldmensch. He had the background, he had the proximity to all 3 disappearances, he had known the boys, he had an unstable lifestyle, he lived alone, and he was described by many as quote-unquote off or odd. And that was enough. Over the next month, Günther was questioned extensively, more than 600 hours of interrogation apparently, and he denied everything. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses, no confession, but the investigators were convinced that he was their man. In October 1974, rather than arresting him, the district court in Zweibrücken ordered him to be committed to a psychiatric hospital. The decision was based not on proof, but on the belief that he might pose a danger. He remained institutionalized until 1976, when the court ultimately ruled that he could no longer be held, and so he was released. The reasoning was that there was no concrete evidence against him, and keeping him confined would have violated the presumption of innocence. So he had to stay for 2 years in the institution, and then he was finally released. And at first I was like, oh, they realized that they had just targeted him because he was the odd guy, right? But then I found an article from 1976 where they talk about Günther J. Back at the time, it was still the question, will he have to face trial? And this article gave a bit more details, and I translated it to my best knowledge and ability. It's an article from Die Zeit. It's the issue number 11 from 1976. It was published on 5th of March 1976, and the article is titled No Bodies and No Confession. Who did it? It's about the disappearance of 3 children. Quote, the criminal court in Zweibrücken will proceed with a trial for murder, even though there are no bodies, no physical evidence, and no confession. The accused is 44-year-old J., who the prosecution alleges murdered 3 people out of bloodlust and other base motives with treachery. He had been checked by police every time a child went missing. After the 3rd case, he voluntarily presented himself to the police. Still, each time the files were closed again. When he was first questioned after Walter's disappearance in 1960, he was carrying a pair of scissors, which he said he intended to use to, quote, cut Walter's bonds, end quote. A bizarre and unexplained detail. Despite over 600 hours of police interrogation, J maintained he had nothing to do with the children's disappearances. He admitted that he had, in fact, been at the Kaufhalle, the department store where Eveline was last seen, on the morning in question. He said he, quote, once accompanied a girl from the store, adding that he could recall this with 30% certainty, end quote. At one point, a boy reported seeing J in the forest carrying a sack that smelled bad. J confirmed this but explained he had found a dead dog and wanted to bury it. The prosecutor, however, interpreted this differently, believing J had possibly been transporting a body or body parts. Despite exhaustive searches of the Pfälzer Wald and of J's hiding places, police found nothing, just old pots, plastic sheets, scraps of paper. They even drained the Eisweiher, which is the local pond I mentioned before, where J had taught the children to swim, but again, no evidence was found. The only offenses the prosecution could actually prove were sexual acts involving girls aged 10 to 14. In 1970, 1972, and 1973, he reportedly grabbed 5 girls from behind, touching their chests. The girls described him as, quote, shaking strangely, breathing oddly, breathing like someone aroused, or licking his lips, end quote. The trial before the criminal chamber in Zweibrücken will include nearly 2,000 pages of case files, 98 witnesses, and 1 psychiatric expert. However, both prosecution and defense agree on one point. If J did kill the children, he was likely not criminally responsible. This is why there is no formal indictment and no accused in the legal sense, only a petition for psychiatric commitment. J had already been held in a psychiatric institution since his arrest in the fall of 1974. Even with the psychiatric expert, Dr. Hans-Ulrich Glesel from the Regional Psychiatric Hospital in Landeck, J denied any connection to the disappearances. He told Glesel that back in 1954 he had been in a psychological state where he gave in to every impulse. The expert reported that Jay expressed a vague feeling that he may have crossed a moral boundary back then and that human life was no longer taboo. He said he remembered in a dreamlike way that killings may have occurred. Jay claimed that he might have killed 3 or 4 adult people, pushing them down a mountainside. But the article notes no adults were reported missing and no such mountain exists in Pirmasens. According to Dr. Glesel, this might suggest that Jay was confessing to later crimes and simply pushed the timeline back to 1954 because he knew that at the time he had already been diagnosed as mentally ill. So the trial in Zweibrücken is ultimately about one question. Is it plausible that Jay killed the children? The prosecutor believes so. He argues that Jay's solitary life in the woods could have made it possible for him to bury the bodies without leaving a trace. But just as possible, maybe more so, is that the murderer, if there ever was one, has never been found. End quote. And that was that. In the end, he was released. He was never charged. He was never convicted. And he went back to his quiet, wandering life. And apparently he died in Pirmasens in a nursing home there in 2021. And so, officially, the case returned to what it had always been, and that's unsolved. What do you think?
Wow. So initially, I really felt like this is nonsense and they are saying he is responsible because he's an easy scapegoat. But there are a couple of facts in that last article that I don't love.
The biggest thing is the sexual assault of the 10 to 14-year-old girls, yeah.
Yeah, but then that's also interesting in a way because, and now I'm going to be splitting hairs a little and somebody with maybe more of a psychology background could tell me if I'm right about this or not. But that in and of itself is almost to me not proof that how do I say this where it makes sense? So the 3 children that were taken were 2 9-year-old boys and a 9 or 10-year-old girl, right? And then the girls that we know that he had sexually assaulted, grabbing their chests, they were an older group of kids. They were 10 to 14, and he was focused on their chests, which makes me think, and again, total speculation here, but that makes me feel like he's actually not a pedophile, which is people who are interested in kids who haven't gone through puberty yet. He seems more interested in like girls specifically who have started that process. He's more of a hebephile.
But 10-year-olds, I mean, we don't know from the articles how the age distribution was. It could have been 3 10-year-olds and a 14-year-old.
That's true.
I really think that's kind of
too out there.
Yeah.
Because that's, well, the boys. But it's like, if you're interested in breasts, why would you have taken... It just doesn't fit. I mean,
sometimes people are interested in all kinds of things.
Well, that's true. That is absolutely true. I don't know. I think whoever disappeared with these kids had a higher level of organization than this man maybe would have been capable of if he was in the throes of schizophrenic psychiatric episodes. You know, I don't know that he'd have been able to, like, where would he have... I feel like there'd be evidence somewhere. You know what I mean? Like,
the thing that baffles me is that nothing was found.
Nothing.
Like, okay, they found the one glove that could have been Klaus-Dieter's, but other than that, where's the clothing? Where's shoes?
Where's anything?
Anything. But then on the other hand, I don't know how big of an area that forest is, and we know that you can hide a body in places like that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, there's no question about that. I think it's interesting that he also turned himself in immediately after the 3rd missing kid. Like, he knew they were going to be interested. So he was like, here I am.
They're going to come anyway, yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of I don't like it.
See, that's what I said. I don't know what to think about it. The scissor part, where he says he wanted to use the scissors on Walter's bonds, the bad-smelling sack.
And how well did he actually know them? He taught them how to swim?
Which is also weird because he's the odd guy who lives in the forest and then he just randomly teaches the kids to swim.
Right.
I don't know that would fly with many parents nowadays.
No, I know. And he's also, The thing is, if he had scissors and he's like, I'm going to go, he might have been under a delusion that he was going to go save him from something.
Mm.
Like, he literally might have been thinking that he was going to go find him somewhere and cut him free. It's so difficult to know because he's so mentally unwell. You know, that really, I don't know. My gut tells me that I don't think it was him. My gut tells me that it was someone a lot more organized. But obviously, everybody must have thought it was him. I'm sure, don't you think?
But also he seemed to have stayed in the area, so...
Right.
Which makes me think, did people not believe that it was him? Because I would think that if the whole town or the majority of the town would suspect him after he's released from the institution, wouldn't they try to get rid of him? Like, you know, chase him away or something like that?
I would have thought so.
But he stayed in the area. Maybe I didn't find anything what the people of Pirmasens thought at the time. I just know that the cousin who made the documentary, Henry Hauck, he doesn't think that he was the perpetrator.
No, I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Like, not that he wasn't a problematic person who was touching girls inappropriately and should not have been, but there's a difference between grabbing a girl from behind and kind of not that it's okay, you know, between that and completely disappearing an entire child. Like, that's a whole other level of, because unless he killed them immediately and buried them kind of immediately, how would he get away with it? I don't know.
It's very mysterious.
It is.
And I really want to see the documentary because I want to know if he gives more information than the one that is available at the moment. Like, he went through the archives. He's living there in the area. You know what I mean?
I do.
A family member. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wonder if any of the crimes could have been a copycat. I don't know.
I mean, it's not impossible.
We just don't have enough information. We don't really know anything. But when I first heard about the girl, I was like, oh, that's a little outside the first two. The first two were very similar in their victim profile, but the third was not. And so I wish, do we have pictures of the kids? Anything?
I saw pictures of Klaus-Dieter and the girl.
Okay. Did the little girl look like a little boy at all? Like,
no.
Okay.
But also, I mean, we know of many cases, as I said before, where pedophiles they don't care if it's,
that's right.
If it's boys or girls.
Yep.
It's
100%.
a certain age group or certain developmental
milestone has or has not been.
Yeah.
Exactly. But see, again, it's that the fact that he went for the girls who were sort of, well, like you said, though, we don't know. It might have been all 10-year-olds and one 14-year-old.
And then we know of serial killers who attack 20-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and then a 60-year-old. So I'm not too bought on the idea that the victim profiles are too strict with many perpetrators and attackers.
Of course. I mean, look at Richard Ramirez.
Often it's just more of because they get the chance to do
opportunity.
And have the feeling to get away. Yeah, opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. Crimes of opportunity by somebody who was in the area on Fridays.
Yeah. That's the eerie thing. What if it was kind of a person who only came into the area on Fridays every few years?
Mm-hmm.
Like a salesperson.
Yeah. A supplier.
Yeah. There were many factories in the area.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about this one for a long time.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear what our listeners think.
I mean, you feel like they have to be, not that they have to be, but do you think any of them are still alive?
Of the kids?
Yeah.
To be completely honest, I think the chances are very low.
Same. Because I feel like they'd have come forward. I feel like there would have been I know my first name is Stephen kind of situation by now.
How old was Stephen when he was taken?
Oh.
He wasn't that young, right? As I remember.
No. I can't remember.
Wasn't he
now.
around like 8-ish?
7 or 8, I think. A little bit younger than these kids. Hang on. 7 years old when he was kidnapped.
7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, actually. Then that gives, but yeah, there's a big difference between 7 and 9 or 7 or 10, isn't there? He was held till he was 14.
Yeah. But he also forgot a lot of things.
That's it. When I was saying, I don't know that you'd be able to like re-educate an 8 or 9-year-old, but maybe you could. Maybe you could. God, that's fucked to think about.
A very eerie case. Very eerie. And I don't know what to think about it.
It's like that very, very early case you did, the cold, cold, cold one that I still am so creeped out by. Oh, all right. Thanks. That was terrible.
I'm sorry.
No, it's what we're here for. Do you have something good this week?
Well, you go first.
Mine is kind of vapid, but we finished Reacher season 3. Loved it. Well, enjoyed it very much. We finished White Lotus. No spoilers. How about you?
Yeah, I don't have something good. I have something that I want to complain about.
Oh, please.
Because you just mentioned TV shows, and I just finished a TV show yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm so upset, and I cried a lot, and I'm mostly upset because it happens to me like over and over and over again over the last couple of years that I really get attached to a fictional series character and then they get killed off in the most stupid way, unnecessary, and I just go through this heartbreak over and over and over again.
Oh.
And I don't even want to watch any shows anymore because of it.
Oh, no.
Hate it.
Oh.
That's my something bad this week.
I'm sorry.
I'm very upset.
I'm sorry. I have to go back and watch those. I've never seen that series. Is 1893 the first one?
Well, I told you it's all about the Yellowstone, but I didn't watch that. So then the first one is 1883.
Okay.
It's about the family, how they ended up in Montana. They actually wanted to go to Oregon on the trail.
Oh, but they got dysentery. Their wagon tipped over. Listen, I played the game. I know all the things.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to spoil anything. And then it's 1923. And that's over now. And I'm very upset. Very sad.
I'm sorry.
My friends.
What
happened to my friends? I know, it's ridiculous.
It is pretty tough when fictional people that we love are torn from us.
Right.
But then we get to reread the books or watch the show over and over again. And
I'm never going to watch that show, rewatch that show. Never.
Never? Oh, my. All right. Well, I need to watch it then. Should be good.
That's it for this week.
That is it for this week. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Johanna, you did an amazing job, as always. And you know what, everyone? We would be so, so grateful if you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, if you would please do us the huge favor of leaving us a rating and a review. That would be wonderful. If you want to get in touch with us, our website is freshhellpodcast.com. Our email is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to find out how you can support us on Patreon, or is it Spotify also?
Spotify,
and YouTube Premium?
You get early access with the premium subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, YouTube should be up. The thing with YouTube is I now realize that you don't see the link to subscribe to the early access on Apple devices. So I don't know what to do about that.
That would explain why I've never seen it.
Yeah, same. I'm like,
weird.
Why isn't it showing up? It's so weird.
That is weird.
I'm going to post the link in the community posts on YouTube, so maybe that works.
Sounds like a plan.
And also, as I said in the beginning of this episode, share, recommend.
Please.
So many times we get new listeners and they were like, yeah, you were recommended to me by my wife, my friend. And it helps us so much. And it also kind of is, for me, it's such a joy to see how people come into our...
Found us.
Yeah, tiny little place we created.
I know, we love it. That's why we ask it on the Facebook.
Yeah,
if you're in our
exactly.
Facebook group, one of the questions is, how did you hear about us? And it just makes us happy to know how you found us. Because we're indie.
Yeah.
We're real indie.
Self-taught, independent.
So good.
I think that's it. Please, tell your pets. We said hi, hug them, cuddle them.
That's right.
Treat them kindly, give them treats. All the jazz, all the glitter. Be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human being. Be kind to yourself if you lose your beloved fictional characters. You're not ridiculous.
Oh.
That's it.
Yeah. And as Churchill famously once said during World War II, if you're going through hell,
Keep going. Tschüss.
bye.